A few years ago, I shifted to my newly built house. It was in a gorgeous area with a scenic view. I wanted to rent my old house, but my partner told me that it would be a great place for kids to stay when they came to visit us. We had 5 kids, and we hardly had any place to accommodate them and their family. My old house was like 5 minutes away from the new place, so it wasn't such a bad idea. Plus, the kids visited us every other month. So, I decided that we would keep the house and check on it once every week. This went on for about 3 years. One day, I had some work in the old neighborhood, so I thought I'd just visit our place and do some cleaning. As I was doing that, I heard some noise coming from outside. There was a huge crane just outside my house, and in front of the crane were some men talking to the neighbor next door. Just to clarify, my neighbor was my tenant. We had 3 properties in the neighborhood. Both of my neighbors next door were my tenants. I had given no one permission to do anything or make any sort of changes to the property. I went out and walked to my neighbor. She was visibly surprised after spotting me. She was smiling, but her facial expression said otherwise. I asked her what was happening, and she pouted and looked at the workers. Then she asked them to wait for a bit while she talked to me. "Oh, nothing. It's just we have been living here for 3 years now, right? Our kids are also growing up, and I just feel the garden is too small for us. I feel like a bigger garden would look marvelous. I would love to build a greenhouse, you know? All my friends are doing it, and I just feel it would be the perfect addition to this place. What do you think?" Our neighbor was a troublesome woman. I had known that forever. The only reason why I hadn't kicked them out yet was his husband, who was a close friend of my brother. My brother lived in a different country, and his only good friend in the city was the husband of the family next door. His wife, however, was an insufferable being. She would usually make stupid demands and ask us to cooperate if she owned the property. We were really frustrated with her behavior. I asked her why the crane was there. I was preparing myself to be shocked by another one of her moronic ideas. "Well, you don't live in that house anymore. It's been so many years since you shifted to your new place. So I thought that I would use part of your house to build a huge greenhouse. That way, I will have more area for the garden and all of these other additions." Use my house? She meant to destroy my house with the crane? Had she forgotten that she was a tenant? "And with whose permission are you doing this?" I asked her in a serious voice. With total disregard in her tone, she replied that she was entitled to the place because nobody lived in our old house. She said, "Well, you should let me do it because nobody lives in that house. It's pretty much useless. It's not like I am talking about using a home full of people. You should understand where I'm coming from." I took a deep breath and told her to stay away from my place. If there was anything she touched, or if she tried to build anything anywhere on the property, I would make sure to make her life hell. That offended her properly. She started yelling and screaming that she should have some rights. Then she threatened to complain about my attitude to my brother as if I was supposed to be scared by that thought. I told her that I was only doing my brother a favor by keeping them. If she thinks that she has any hold on my life, I would prove her wrong in an instant. Even then, she was loud about how she wanted to build a garden and a greenhouse. She kept saying that the space was small and it would only be an improvement to my property. I told her that I needed no such improvements. Then she argued that she was the one paying for it, so there was no reason for me to forbid her from doing this. I was exhausted at this point, explaining the same things over and over again. I simply told her that she should be ready for the consequences if she chose to do that. Karen just rolled her eyes and told me to wait and watch how she would beautify my land. I told my husband what was happening. He was really upset. I made a call to my brother and told him that we were done doing him any favors. I told him what had unfolded that day and how it was becoming impossible for us to tolerate that kind of behavior. My brother was still adamant, and he stressed that the husband was still decent. I told him that it was not his house, and if he cared about his friends so much, he should buy a house and rent it to them. We decided to kick the Karen family out soon. I called my lawyer and discussed the situation with him. However, we were late. The next day, I received the news of her digging a hole in my land and destroying a part of my living room. I was informed that some of the precious artwork were also destroyed in the process. Our house was expensive, and just the cost of rebuilding it would be a lot. Our garden and lawn were also ruined. We spent hundreds of dollars on maintaining everything, and she destroyed it in the blink of an eye without any regard. There was no way I was going to let her go without reimbursing us for the damages. I was livid. I called her husband and demanded a reply that would make sense somehow. He was equally shocked. He told me that his wife tricked him into thinking that I gave her permission. He said that I suggested that I would give her permission in writing later. I knew something like this could happen. That's why I recorded the entire conversation on my phone. This was what I always practiced with my neighbors because I knew very well that they could pull something like this, especially this particular Karen. I told him that there would be consequences and he should prepare himself or it would end up badly. I called my lawyer and told him the entire thing. He assured me that we had an upper hand in the case. In a few days or so, I sent my tenants a court hearing notice and an immediate eviction notice. Within a week, all of their stuff was out of my house. I would thank the husband for having a bit of sense in him. He apologized a lot of times and asked me for some time to pay for the damages, although I had no faith in any of them. Karen, however, was furious. No apologies from her side, no regrets, not even the least bit of decency to wonder if she was wrong. She called me at least 20 to 30 times a day and sent me 100 texts about how I was being unfair to her. She had the audacity to argue with me and send me toxic texts when she realized that I wasn't going to comfort her in any way. I let her do what she wanted, though. She had no idea of what was awaiting her. Our first court hearing date soon arrived, and I went to the court along with my husband and the lawyer. I submitted the necessary documents, the recordings of our conversation, my text messages to her husband, and his confession that they had no permission from us, a copy of our agreement, and all the other things. Karen had no idea that I had recorded the conversation. She came home later and asked me to withdraw my case. It was funny. I asked her what made her think I would do that. She said that we were friends for a long time, which we obviously weren't, and that I should have some respect and common decency. She urged me to take everything back again and again. When I told her that there was nothing she could do to change my mind, she was fuming and yelling at me for being so untrustworthy. She even tried to physically harm me by pushing me. I reminded her that I had CCTV footage in my living room, and that if she dared to do anything, she would have another case waiting for her. That really scared her. She stopped coming, but her texts and calls never stopped. I just ignored it. Her husband pleaded with us to tell the judge to lessen the costs, should the judgment get really harsh. I wouldn't, I reminded him once again. A few hearings later, the court finally concluded that it was a breach of the lease. I had enough evidence to support me. My neighbors were liable for the full cost of restoring my house and the property to its original condition. Also, the expensive art pieces that were destroyed would have to be bought again. It was ordered that if they could not find a replacement, they would have to pay for it. That shook Karen. For some reason, she was overconfident earlier that she would win the case somehow. Now, she was presented with reality. Karen and her husband were crying. There was no way they could pay for everything. They pleaded a couple of times, but they had enough money to reimburse the cost somehow. It's just that they would be left with little to no savings. A few months later, everything was almost restored to its original condition. The garden and the lawn were reinstated as well. It was a lot, but they eventually did it, and somehow paid for the things they destroyed. It was such a hefty price for them. As I said, by the end of the construction, the husband confessed that they weren't left with any savings. I felt bad for him, but he had to share the responsibilities. I heard from a friend later that they had shifted to an extremely small studio apartment with their kids. Their kids were teenagers, so I could only imagine how much they had to suffer because of their mom's stupidity. Karen, too, was compelled to work full-time rather than just being a housewife who did MLM part-time. Even that wasn't consistent. They only had enough money to buy essential items and their rent. I was told that they were living paycheck to paycheck. I felt bad, but not really. Karen was finally living the life she deserved. A little background info. My wife and I purchased our house a few years ago, and the day we moved in, our neighbor, Roger, called the cops on us for moving in too loud. We weren't playing music or even talking amongst ourselves, just my wife and I, moving our belongings into our new house. Cops came. I explained that I was just moving in, and they apologized for bothering us. Roger, in all of his retired Proud Boy glory, comes out of his house immediately after they left to let us know he is the one that called the cops, and in other words, says he is setting the tone for our new life. Even still, we were super cordial with this guy because we wanted to make a good impression in our new neighborhood. It's our first home, and it was important for us to make it homey. About a year or so later, our first son is born. We let our property fall to the back burner while we adjusted to parenthood, and a few newspapers pile up in our driveway and, in the rain, sort of melted onto our driveway. All on our property, Roger comes knocking on our door to complain. I tell him I'm sorry that we let it get away from us. I explain that we have a newborn son and I would get to it ASAP. He digs in and starts telling me how when he was a new father, he didn't let anything affect his property, and he tells me I'm being lazy. I said, then why don't you pick it up if you're so worried about it? To which he says, no, I want you to pick up the effing mess. I was trying to be semi-cordial still because I'm not interested in unnecessary conflict with my neighbor, so I told him, fine, I will get to it, and he left. Later that year, Roger comes over one day to ask if he can trim the tree hangs over my fence onto his side of the fence. I'm fine with that, so I say no problem, and he casually mentions how one time when a 17-year-old kid, friends with his delinquent drug addict son at the time, broke into his garage, he hit him in the head with a baseball bat until he was retarded, and the police came and he was cleared of all responsibility because it was a break-in. He's smiling and laughing while telling me this, noted, I'm thinking to myself, this guy is an effing piece of crap psychopath. Well, it's a couple of years later now, with a few more minor run-ins, but nothing too significant, and my wife and I just had our second son 1 month ago. About 10 days ago, son isn't even 3 weeks old at the time, I get a notice on my door saying my lawn is in violation of my city's code. I mowed it 2 days before my son was born, so it's been about 3 weeks since I mowed it, and it's been raining since. I have 48 hours to comply. I called the number on the card and no answer, so I called the non-emergency line to verify what my responsibility is because of the vague wording on the door hanger. It's because one of the types of grass in my lawn, growing very sparsely like 1 blade per square inch, is over 12 inches tall. The majority of the grass was like 2 to 3 inches long, but there was another type there as well that grew faster. I told them that I'm a new father and asked for an extension to deal with it later. They said, don't even worry about the lawn, just take care of the baby. So now, with some newfound confidence, I mow my lawn in spiral shapes, leaving lots of grass remaining as a middle finger to whoever, we know who it is at this point in the story, right? Called the cops on me about my lawn. A couple of days later, Roger talks to me over our shared backyard fence and asks about my lawnmower and if it's busted or something. I told him, no, I just have more important priorities than mowing my lawn, and tell him about my new son, and then I asked if he was the one that called the cops on me about it. He says he called code enforcement, but not me. He called on my new neighbors on my other side. A really nice Mexican family who was always diligent about their lawn and always working outside on their new property. He says code enforcement must have happened to notice my lawn when they were to follow up on his call next door. At this point, I say something along the lines of, look, I'm a pretty effing cool guy. If you have a concern about my property, then you can speak with me directly. He swears up and down that he didn't call on me and that it was just a coincidence. Whatever. About a week after that yesterday, he knocks on my door and I already know what's coming. I answer the door kind of chuckling and greet him. He's kind of chuckling too at this point because it's effing ridiculous. He says, hey, so you said I could talk to you if I had an issue with your property. I tell him, yeah, by all means. He gestures to my lawn and asks what it's about. I say, it's kind of like a middle finger to whoever called the code enforcement on me. He is irate. Says if it's a middle finger to him. I stop him and remind him that he told me that he didn't call them on me, so he shouldn't feel targeted. He ignores me and restarts his sentence the same way again. So I cut him off again and I say, I specifically am telling you it's not a middle finger to you, Roger. He says, if it's a middle finger to me, then this means war. Over what? I asked him, laughing. He is getting bigger and huffier by the second and tells me I'm a lazy piece of crap and my property is in shambles. Lol. And all the other neighbors mow their lawns. I remind him that I have a newborn son and my lawn can suck my dick for now. He puffs up as big as he can and says, I never had this issue when I was a new father. I told him I don't give a crap about what he did as a dad. Ironically enough, his drug addict son lives in the house on the other side of him and causes trouble in the neighborhood regularly. Cars peeling out, people screaming at each other, drug addicts always waiting outside, etc. Now he tells me that he's going to call code enforcement on me every day, and I tell him to get the F off my property. He says, move me. So I tell him I'm calling the cops, and he says to do it. So I grab my phone and start dialing. He walks to the sidewalk and keeps yelling at me about how I'm lazy and not fit to own my property. Cops come to speak with us, very anticlimactic. They did make sure to let him know that he needs to get off my property when I say so, and that's all I want from them. Tomorrow, I'm going to take my hedge trimmers and mow my maze down to 11 inches. F you, Roger. TLDR. My rude neighbor called code enforcement on me about 3 weeks worth of unmowed lawn. There is a code stating that the lawn must be less than 12 inches, so tomorrow I'm bringing my hedge trimmers out and trimming a couple of inches off the top to bring it down to 11 inches.